have you got any intro quips prepared for me about my health, physical health?
No, unless there's anything you're willing to volunteer.
I don't think there's anything new.
No, regular bowel movements?
Relatively. Yeah, just the lack of toilet paper at the moment in the house has been problematic.
Yeah, that's true. I did notice
need
that.
to get that
we'll
sorted.
Sort that out later.
Yeah.
But for now, let's talk F1. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Top Step. It is 16 minutes past 6 local time here in Leeds. And the Aussie GP concluded about 45 minutes ago. It was a very intriguing start to the season with a winner in George Russell that we probably all expected, but plenty of interesting talking points brought up nonetheless. And with me to discuss them is Johnny Holmes. Johnny.
Yeah, with them today is me. It was an intriguing race, and I think the first half of it was explosive and enthralling and action-packed and hectic. I think the second half, largely due to the strategy decisions of a particular team, no prizes for guessing which one it was, but we'll get onto that, maybe didn't have the same impetus and potency as a viewing prospect that the first half did. But I think there are, for all the negative talk, and there will be some negative talk, I think we'll have some negative talk about the new regulations. They did at least serve about 20 to 25 laps of very intriguing racing at the front. So that's something.
Yeah, absolutely. Leclerc and Russell were trading places for a good 6 or 7 laps, it felt like. Obviously, it is a shame that what looked like was going to be quite a close race didn't really materialise, but you can't really lay that at the door of, the new regulations. And also, even just the fact of having a quiet second half of the race in general, that's something that we're very well used to.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think them kind of trading blows at the start, not to the extent that we saw today, but we have seen that in the past, and then it sort of calms down as they go into management mode, certainly on the tyres, and then the strategy comes more into play, and then it's a case of, they duke it out on the pit wall, and Ferrari were found lacking in that regard. But yeah, we're up early, aren't we, Charlie? We're trying to find some energy.
Yeah, I was up at 20 to 4, and I opened the bedroom door, and you were there, and you said, Piastri's out. There was news right from the moment that I woke up. The alarm went off probably, felt about 9 hours too early, but we got up and we did it, and it was worth it. But yeah, Piastri, before we'd even risen, had already finished his day. So what I have written down in front of me here is the Australian GP curse real? Could you please enlighten me, Johnny? Because I don't know what the Australian GP curse is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you get this a few times in sports where certainly a home occasion causes problems. And I think the Australian GP curse, the only comparative thing I can think of is there was a race skater called Elise Christie, who would dominate everything. But when it got to the Olympics, she had a 100% crashing rate across like 3 Olympics where she never, Winter Olympics, where she never won anything. I think that's similar for Australian drivers at the Australian Grand Prix. So Mark Webber, I don't know if you've heard of Mark Webber, but he was Sebastian Vettel's teammate in the all-dominant, all-conquering Red Bull of the early 2010s, who finished 5th on debut when he started his career at the Australian Grand Prix. And then after that, and I guess including that, never actually achieved the podium and was woefully unlucky throughout his stint in Australia. And then the next kind of Australian hopeful was Daniel Ricciardo, who on debut at the Australian Grand Prix finished 2nd on the road and was then disqualified for, I think it was fuel problems, fuel usage or something along those lines. But yeah, he was disqualified from 2nd place, and then for the rest of his career never got on the podium in Australia. Then the next big hope is Oscar Piastri, who of course last year was part of a qualifying 1-2 for McLaren, the all-conquering McLaren car that was by far the fastest, was running Norris really, really close for the first stint until it started raining, and then he span off, got stuck in the grass, and I think recovered to about 9th. And then now today, crashed before he even got to the grid. They do like I think it's called the reconnaissance lap, where they have to go round to get to the grid to sort of like sit on stilts and warm their tyres up and stuff about half an hour before the race. And I haven't actually seen...
No, yeah, I was about to ask. I've not
crash.
Seen it. Let's have a look.
I imagine, my guess would be that it's some sort of electrical deployment thing. Let's have a look at this.
Just having a look now on the ever reliable YouTube shorts.
Oh, he loses on... No, that's just pure error.
Wow.
I think he just... I mean, it's hard to say, but it looks like he just spins it up on the curb.
Yeah, it's a big crash. His right front wheel is just completely
Ripped
dislodged.
Oh,
He just loses it on the apex as you're on the edge of the corner.
I mean, we don't know if he's had we don't know if it's a deployment issue. We don't know for sure. Let me see if there is any...
Just while you're looking for that, Johnny, how much do you read into stuff like this as a sports fan? You know, a curse or bad juju. Do you believe in it, or do you think it's just a good story?
Well, I think there's a combination of the two. I think in reality there is no curse. Of course there's no curse. But as soon as people start to talk, it's the same with anything, certainly in sports, and the power the media has to kind of concoct a narrative, it's going to be in your head. I mean, I mentioned that Elise Christie thing, where I think that she just, in order to combat this narrative of her crashing at the Olympics, she got more aggressive to try and dispel it, and then crashed more. And I think that's the same goes with most things. When there's it's Arsenal with the Premier League, that'll be in the players' heads because they're known as bottle jobs. Maybe South Africa in the cricket, who knows? And I think this is the case. I think maybe Piastri will turn up with a quick car going, I know that I can do well here. They talk about this curse. It's nonsense. I'm going to put it out of my head. But even the action of having to put it out of your head means it'll be in there somewhere. And we don't know if that was driver error, that crash. It looked like it might have been losing it on the curb. Maybe he had a spike of power. We don't know. But I think that, whereas, of course, in terms of magical voodoo juju, there is no curse. But once it gets spoken about, that narrative can enter the minds of even the finest sportsmen.
And you're probably anticipating an uptick in these kind of driver errors / just random slow speed crashes while people get used to these new regulations?
Yeah, almost certainly. And because the whole point of the regulations is a hike in power, and there's nothing that causes accidents more than snaps of oversteer, which is where you'll see drivers wresting the car on exits to corner. And that is going to come from the wheels spinning up because they've got so much power to get down. It's all good having power in your engine, but when you plant your foot and the rear wheels start spinning up, suddenly your car's unstable, and the best drivers will be able to catch that and play with that. But even the very best drivers, if they get too much like hiking power, or let's say they get the deployment of the battery wrong, they squirt the throttle and they squirt the battery and then spin up the rears. That's what my guess that happened to Oscar there, even though it was at very slow speed. So that's just speculation. But yeah, I think we'll definitely, as they get to grips with it. And something else we've been seeing as well is, oversteer moments on the exit of corners, but lockups, a lot of lockups going into corners. My assumption on that is a combination of the fact that they're going to be arriving at corners at different speeds depending on what battery usage they're doing. So usually back in the day, last year, they would be metronomic. They'd arrive at a corner at the same spot, hit the brakes at the same spot and turn in. Whereas now there might be one lap where they're arriving at a corner 10 kph quicker because they're attacking, and then the next one they might be 10 kph slower because they're harvesting battery. And then that means that their braking point is going to change. They might forget that. They might be so used to being metronomic, and then they lock up and make a mistake. And I also think that could be due to them having to put more force through the brake pedal to stop it and slow it down from greater speeds, which is causing these lockups, front lockups. And we'll get on to a very significant case of rear locking a bit later on. But yeah, so there are going to be more errors, I think.
So the whole time that I've been, vaguely interested in F1, the concept of, racing within yourself to preserve tyres or whatnot, and then going flat out at various points has always been a thing. Is it just that under these new regulations, the difference in speeds when you're doing one or the other is just going to be way more stark? Is it actually the case that when someone is, holding back to protect the tyres, it's actually, you're talking tenths of a second over the lap?
Yeah, so when looking after the tyres, something that you would commonly see is something called lift and coast, which is whereas optimal speed to go faster through the corner, you would accelerate until the braking point, you would come off the accelerator and go on the brake at the same time, like a seesaw motion. That is not going to happen when you're lifting and coasting. Lifting and coasting is when, a few hundred meters before the corner, you're lifting off so that you roll into the corner rather than punching onto the brakes. So there'll be maybe a second where you are neither accelerating nor braking, and you're just lifting off and coasting in. And that's something they would do with the tyres quite a lot, and we'd see it. The big difference is with this is that super clipping, which is going to become a really frustrating term, I think, which basically it's a fancy epic name for slowing down a lot to harvest energy on a straight, which looks really odd, is happening not only right before the but further before the turn, so an earlier point in the straight, they're having to super clip, but also the driver isn't coming off the throttle per se as they would with lift and coast. They would ease off the throttle and it would be a bit more of a smooth transition rolling through the corner. They're still on full throttle. The engine just can't deploy because it's harvesting energy. So yeah, much more stark. But I think the big thing, because you mentioned lift and coast, that has happened in races throughout history, certainly in the last 15 or so years with the degrading tyres. We're seeing it in qualifying now, which usually qualifying was an opportunity to see Formula One cars at their pinnacle on the ragged knife edge, and seeing onboards of the pole position lap coasting on the way to one of the fastest chicanes on the calendar, which is I think it's turn 8-9 in Albert Park, Australia, is a really strange sight. And I think whereas the races maybe won't be ruined by these regs, there is an argument that qualifying is going to be a far weaker spectacle than it once was.
I'm conscious that we've not even got to the start of the race yet, but can we just talk a little bit about qualifying?
Yeah.
What did you make of it, other than that general overview that, qualifying in general might take a bit of a hit this year, but in terms of the actual qualifying, we saw obviously the Verstappen crash was notable. Was there anything else that caught your eye?
I think we spoke at the start that Fernando Alonso being one position off getting into Q2, out qualifying Verstappen. I know there was some mitigating circumstances there, but I don't think anyone expected that. Perez ahead of Bottas, I think that's going to be an interesting fight throughout the season. But generally speaking, Alpine maybe would be a bit of a shock. We were expecting that. Well, I was certainly expecting them to be a bit closer to being best of the rest. They had a bit of a poor qualifying. But I wasn't too shocked by the order. I think hats off to Isaac Hadjar for sticking at P3 with Max not there. That does suggest there is some underlying pace in that Red Bull. Throughout the whole of Max's time at Red Bull, the kind of narrative has been, and what we've seen on track, is that when he's out the picture, Red Bull, they're only fighting with one arm because Max is so far clear of the teammate that when he's nowhere, they're nowhere. Hadjar sticking at P3 suggests that there is pace in him and the car, which is good. But to be honest, qualifying went as I expected. Mercedes about 7 tenths clear of the field. The first of many ominous signs for them throughout this weekend.
Yeah, it was ominous, but one area in which the field might be able to get a little bit back on them, as we saw, was the start, with both of them really struggling off the line, and Ferrari, as you hinted at in the preview, just so quick off the line. What did you make of that start? Could you run us through it, actually, what happened? Yeah, so, well, first of all, when they pulled up to the grid, we saw that sort of startup phase, and they had a new graphic which was, startup section, which is where the cat's meowing sound came in, with the engine sort of firing up. And then, as Charles Leclerc referenced in the they do
a pre what's it called, like a debrief after the race, where the 3 podium sitters sit in a room and just have a chat and watch the screens, which is a really cool thing that Liberty have brought in, and I really like it, and they need to keep doing that. Leclerc saying about how the lights went out really quickly. Yes, get that mug in there, get the badge in. The lights went out really quickly. So you got this charging up phase. They're all charging up, and I think a lot of drivers were caught out by how quickly the lights went out, which, by the way, the Formula One starting procedure is very interesting because it's a manual procedure. You'd think it would be automated. It's not. And that's so that drivers don't learn how long it takes, and they preempt the start. So basically, the starting procedure is they press one button to put the lights on, then the 5th light holds, and the person sat in that box over the track can wait as long as they want to press that button. And whoever it was very trigger happy today because they just pressed it immediately and away they went. Now, George Russell said, so we saw the Ferraris blitzing through. Charles Leclerc actually took the lead from P4. George Russell said that he just felt everyone else got a really bad start. He said that the Mercedes were on 0% battery at the start, so they were low on deployment, hence why they got a poor start. But actually, Anthony Davidson on the Sky Pad showed an interesting graphic of Lando Norris next to Lewis Hamilton on the grid, actually getting possibly even a better, but certainly as good a start as Lewis Hamilton. But it was the second phase of the start, sort of that 20, 30 through 80 miles an hour, where the Ferrari just came out of nowhere and just darted through. And you never see this at starts, where Charles Leclerc goes to the outside to go past Hadjar, and then he's able to cut back to the inside to thread the needle through. You only really see that when cars have been slow off the line, but they were just so quick off the line. So whereas Russell might have a point that in the next races, battery charge will be better for the starts, I still think that fundamentally, if Ferraris are there or thereabouts at the front, they're going to make places up, which is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just the way they just seemed to take off after hitting those second and third gears. One thing that was going through my mind when you were speaking there about the lights, which is really cool, actually. I suspected that it might be something of that sort, but it is cool to know that, and it makes complete sense. Otherwise, it would very much just be like counting the seconds and then you hit the pedal. But have you ever been on Oblivion at Alton Towers?
I have not been on Oblivion at Alton Towers.
It's the one that like just drops you vertically, but down into a hole. Yeah. But it's basically you hang over the edge because there's like a chain. The chain that brings you up, there's a reverse chain holding you back, and then it drops you. But the way they did it was, it's basically the amount of time that you're waiting there to be dropped is anywhere between 1 and 3 seconds, I think, and it alternates ride per ride so that you don't actually know when you're going to drop, which adds a lovely dimension to it.
Replayability.
Yes, absolutely. Especially when I used to go in October half term with my mate, and we had this like special cut through to just run all the way back up to the top, so we would just do it over and over again. Anyway, not important at all.
I enjoyed it.
So that start was thrilling, and then it gave way to the best part of this race, which was the, as you've called it, the Russell versus Leclerc ding dong. Yes. It was a really interesting battle. It was we've seen two people, P1, P2, duke it out before in the early laps. But what was really interesting about this is as soon as one person got through, particularly Russell, you just had no confidence that he was going to be able to hold on, because you didn't know how much of it was driving, how much of it was battery deployment. And Leclerc seemed to always have an answer for him in the early part of the race. Yeah,
in the build-up to this season, there was talk that there might be situations where an attacking driver sat behind would deploy a lot of energy, use overtake mode, boost mode, all that they have at their disposal now to go through. But if there's a track with numerous straights, that could leave them vulnerable to the car behind that maybe held back a bit of battery. And we could see like 2 or 3 position swaps per lap on certain tracks. Albert Park in Australia being one of the prime candidates for that, because it really is a track where there's 3 straights per lap where you could make an overtake. I thought that was all a little bit wishful thinking. I didn't expect to see that, but we did see that, exactly that, where Russell, in getting past Leclerc, had to use a lot of his battery, and was just a sitting duck on the next straight for Leclerc to repass him, which just shows how wheel-to-wheel battling now has a whole new dimension. It's a shame because later on in the race, I don't know if it's just because they managed to get their graphics fired up or whatever, or maybe they just had certain data for certain cars. In the Verstappen versus Norris battle, we had like a battery usage graphic, which they need more of that because that was really useful to see where they're deploying and where they have more battery than the other driver and how they're using it tactically. But I can only imagine that Leclerc was saving his battery, waiting for Russell to go through and then saying, right, well, you've used yours, I'm now going to use mine, and going back through. And at that point, it looked like the Ferrari had the pace to stay with the Mercedes, maybe based on the way Mercedes were able to stretch their legs on older tyres later in the race. That suggests that the cat and mouse energy deployment was what was keeping Ferrari in the game, and that maybe they were just being smarter with it. But it certainly makes for entertaining viewing. The only hope now is that overtakes don't become trivial and sort of anticlimactic, where someone gets past and you go, well, it doesn't really mean anything, because they'll just be re-overtaken. An overtake for the lead of the race has always historically been quite a standout celebratory moment where you don't expect them to be re-attacked. But hey, I'm not complaining about on-track action, overtaking. That's why we watch F1, so more of that, please.
A little bit further down the grid in 6th, Max Verstappen. Probably not going to see him down there too much this season, but considering the circumstances behind this one and his crash in qualifying, it's been a good day for him all in all. Yeah,
definitely. I think the best that they were hoping for before the race at Red Bull was top 8, which is basically be in the top 4 teams, the fastest teams, McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes, just get back to the there and overtake all of the midfield cars. Obviously, we saw Piastri crash, which gave a little window of opportunity for him to come through to 7th. We finished 6th, didn't he? So who else did he finish ahead of? Hadjar had an engine failure, so he was actually gifted a couple of those places, and in reality probably would have finished 8th, but was able to close up onto the back of Norris, who managed to hold him at bay. I'm imagining that because of the amount of race time Max lost coming through the field, the fact that he was on the back of the McLaren suggests that Red Bull, as we saw in qualifying with Hadjar, do have the pace to be ahead of the McLaren and on par with the Ferraris maybe, which would put them there or thereabouts in the podium fight. So I think the signs for Max and Red Bull are decent. I don't think that they showed the pace that suggests they're going to be on the level of Mercedes, because I think that would have seen them get past Norris and McLaren. I think if Mercedes were starting at the back, Russell was starting at the back, I think he would have gone past Norris quite comfortably. So, but there are good signs, and I think in terms of a recovery drive, it was as good as he could possibly have done, really.
Yeah, speaking about the Hadjar engine woes, obviously it's a mixed to poor start for Red Bull, but because of Verstappen's crash, which we're not expecting to be a regular fixture of qualifying, and then this engine failure, it's hard to know exactly or get a good grip exactly of how competitive they're going to be from this race. But speaking about the engine trouble specifically, obviously we don't really know what happened, but what did the signs look like to you? Did it look worrying, losing power in that way?
I think it's worth bearing in mind that Red Bull are actually making their own engines for the first time ever this season. So there's always going to be a few hiccups. And the expectation was one of those hiccups would be just power output. And they seem to be there or thereabouts. I think they'll feel pretty positive. And also, so they've got 2 Red Bulls and 2 Racing Bulls. So 3 out of the 4 cars did finish. Not terrible for their first ever race as a power unit developer. But yeah, it's a shame because we would have liked to have seen a representative Red Bull car. I know Hadjar didn't get the best of starts. I think he slipped back a little bit. He was passed by Arvid Lindblad with a brilliant start and a brilliant race for the debutant, for the rookie. So we will talk about him more. But he was a bit of a thorn in Hadjar's side early on. But Hadjar got back through and seemingly didn't have the pace to stay with the Ferraris. I think he was lurking about 4 or 5 seconds back when his engine gave out. So I don't think the reliability they'll get on top of raw pace is what they'll worry about. You've always got to remember that Verstappen historically has been so clear of his teammates that if Hadjar was dropping back but still, fourth, fifth place, you imagine that Max would probably slot into that gap around where the Ferraris were. So I think there's promising signs.
Yeah, so with Red Bull out of the picture for today, and obviously that fantastic start, it seemed like Ferrari were really in this race for the first half, and then they made a tactical blunder, which even I, as only a casual fan, aware is a fairly regular fixture in the life of a Ferrari fan. But what did you make of their decision not to pit either driver under the virtual safety car? Yeah,
so a bit of context for how a virtual safety car and a safety car works is that the field is neutralised when there's an incident, so the cars have to stick to a delta and slow right down. Which means that on track, they should lose and gain no time because they're all running to a delta and the gaps should stay the same. What that means is when you come into the pit lane and make a stop, it gives you a free stop, maybe not quite a free stop, you still lose some time, but if the cars are trundling around and you're in the pit lane going at 60 kilometres or 80 kilometres an hour, and the cars are going to a delta that's much slower than race speed, obviously you're going to lose less time because they're not zipping around the track to pass you in the pit lane. So rather than it taking about 20 to 22 seconds to pit, it takes about 10 to 12 in terms of race time lost. Mercedes spotted that, and George Russell was really astute, saying this is going to last a while, we have time to stop. Got on the radio to the team, and both Mercedes as well as quite a lot of cars came into the pits at that point. Ferrari decided to stay out and maximise, tyre usage. I think the thinking was to build a delta to Mercedes to try and stretch for the one stop. But what actually happened in the end is Mercedes not only got the free stop, but they still were able to one stop anyway, which shows they have great tyre wear or lack thereof. But also Ferrari just threw away an opportunity because what it did is it left Mercedes the chance to come back out of the on circuit way closer than they should have been. Ferrari then stopped in normal racing conditions, which meant that they lost a lot more time in the pit lane. And from that moment, relinquished track position, relinquished control of the race, and never looked like getting it back. So yeah, there were times during the race where it looked like it might not be a blunder and Mercedes might struggle to do a one-stop, but very quickly it showed that it was a blunder. And as you say, Ferrari being Ferrari. We said, actually, I should say, sorry, is that you made a point when they pointed out that Ferrari was sticking to plan A. It's as if they had their nose in their notebooks, like, we're stopping on this lap, who cares what's going on around us? That's a very Ferrari thing. And I think you'll notice that throughout the season.
Yeah, definitely seemed like a lack of adaptability, and you'd probably hope it was that rather than just them accepting the fact that their race was not with Mercedes, because obviously they're one of only, two teams really that we're expecting to be able to get anywhere near. But as you've put here, it was ominous signs for Mercedes, and George Russell, two pretty fantastic race wins last year from, as I was saying on commentary, the only races that he led at any point. This is now the first time he's ever led the Drivers' Championship, and so maybe, if he's got a little bit of previous for, not relinquishing things as he didn't do last season, might be ominous. And you even looked beyond that when the race was wrapping up. You were saying not even that you thought George Russell was going to win this year. You said this could be the start of a Russell era.
I really do think so. So F1 tends to work in eras. Generally what you get is a team nails a regulation set, and it takes a while for teams to catch up, which means that largely you're seeing an inter-team battle. That's not always the case, but that's kind of how it works. As far back as Ferrari in the 2000s, and then you had Red Bull in the early 2010s, and then you had Mercedes in the mid to late 2010s, and then Red Bull again in the 2020s. These things go in cycles, and a dominant team rises to the fore, and then a dominant driver has a stranglehold on the sport. That's how it usually looks and how it usually works out. Schumacher, Hamilton, Vettel, Verstappen. That's how it all happened. And I think we are entering into a new era, and I think this could be the George Russell era, because although Kimi Antonelli is a very capable, highly talented, with a huge ceiling, he's not the finished article yet. He's very young. He's still a teenager, I think, and he's only been in F1. This is his second season. George Russell has all that experience. Let's not forget, when he came into F1, he was as highly rated as Kimi Antonelli is now. He had just dominated all the junior formula, and he stepped into Williams and got a podium with them in the race that never was at Spa, but he still delivered second place in the rain to get that podium, and in qualifying, that is. And he's always been a star of the show and never really had a car to show it. When he joined Mercedes, they suddenly fell off, and he was very unlucky.
It was that year, wasn't it?
Year, yeah, that he joined and they fell off. So and proceeded to outperform Lewis Hamilton, which suggests that if he did join even a year before, he would already be a world champion. He's been a champion in waiting for a while. He's a top class operator. He has that needle and that grit. We said in the preview about how he can race Verstappen not only on track but also in the mind, where I don't think anyone else can. I think by the end of this regulation set, which is due to finish in 2031, that might be brought forward because of the issues we've had, and I can see some changes being made a bit earlier. But an early prediction after one race of these regulation sets that by the time we have a new regulation, I believe that George Russell will be at least a triple world champion.
Wow.
That's my prediction.
A big claim. He also gave us probably my favourite moment of the race, which was his team radio after he won, and he was like, I like this car, I like this engine, which, as you say, a pretty serious, feisty guy. It was nice to see him
he's a goofy boy.
A little bit gleeful, but he wasn't the only feisty driver out there and trying to fight. He didn't even have to get feisty today. It was a procession, but there was someone a few cars back from him who was really getting his elbows out in a way that we didn't see coming at all, and that was Lindblad in the Racing Bull. What did you make of his debut race?
Really, really impressive from Arvid Lindblad. His first race, a rookie, being vaulted into the sport with Racing Bulls. He showed promise in the junior formula, but never really showed. I don't believe he won any championships in the F2 or F3. I'll have to check that, but I don't think he did. But he's highly rated at Red Bull, a youngster who hasn't passed his driving test yet. And much like Max Verstappen when he joined, and to step into this race, not only in the race to deliver what I think was a P8 finish, which is a fantastic debut, really, in the Racing Bulls car, which, he maximised that. That's probably the best that they could have got out of it. But also in qualifying, he was right on his teammate Liam Lawson, who maybe isn't the most experienced person in the world. 8 for Arvid Lindblad. To be right one position behind Liam Lawson in qualifying, and actually led him on pace up until that point and didn't quite extract the maximum in Q3, and then to completely outperforming in the race is really impressive. And I think Red Bull might have a next star on their hands. And what this tends to mean is that pressure is piled on whoever the second Red Bull driver is. Luckily, Isaac Hadjar qualified really well, and his retirement was out of his hands, and he was doing all right in the race at that point. So not alarm bells yet by any stretch of the imagination for Hadjar, but if Lindblad keeps this up, Hadjar's got to deliver in that second seat.
Absolutely, and if history does repeat itself, then he might even have to look out for his girlfriend as well, based on what you were telling me in the last one. Another surprisingly high finish was Gabriel Bortoleto, just one place behind him in 9th. Audi in the points in their debut race. That's great signs for them, isn't it?
Yeah, incredible. I think Audi have probably, I said Aldi then, the Aldi Formula One team on a budget.
To see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The blue and yellow colours on the grid would be interesting.
I love Audi. I have every faith that they would somehow make a good F1 car.
Yeah. There was a team that actually Aston Martin took over, which was the Racing Point team, and before that was Force India, who had like the smallest team of engineers and staff on the grid, but they would always finish 4th in the constructors behind the big three. I think Aldi would probably be able to produce that. But yes, Gabriel Bortoleto in the Audi finishing 9th. Nico Hülkenberg, I don't believe, was able to start. He certainly didn't finish. No, he completed no laps, I think. Issues for Hülkenberg. But Gabriel Bortoleto, Audi, I think, from the start of testing to where we are now, are the most improved team because they really struggled in that Barcelona shakedown. They didn't really look like threatening. I predicted that Audi and Williams would sort of be duking it out to finish in that bottom of the group ahead of Cadillac and Aston Martin, who are sort of the minnows. Saying that Aston Martin and minnows is ridiculous, but they are at the moment. But no, Bortoleto 9th, always looked on for points. That Audi has done really well. They've turned it around really quickly. And Nico Hülkenberg is a classy operator, and you can only imagine that he would have been up there as well. So yeah, really promising start for them. And with Racing Bulls in 8th and Audi in 9th, I think they'll be really happy. But in terms of the happiest of the midfield teams, as I sort of predicted, I think, in the preview, was Haas and Ollie Behrman in 7th, showing that their testing promise was no fluke. A brilliant drive from him, had to come through the field a bit. We saw some overtakes on Lindblad and on Gasly and Bortoleto. We talk about drivers for the future. As soon as Lewis Hamilton does call it quits in that Ferrari, you better believe that Ollie Behrman will be straight in that Scarlet car. He's a real talent and always seems to deliver the maximum that the Haas has to offer. So I think those three drivers, 7th, 8th and 9th, will be very satisfied with their outings.
Absolutely. Just a confirmation that it was a technical failure on the grid that forced Hülkenberg to retire. They had to wheel him off. So that's a shame for him, but he'll get another chance as the light starts to just peer through.
Dawn breaks.
We haven't actually acknowledged that we're in a different room today. We're in the living room, which is actually a much better place to record. But unfortunately, because we are now called the corridor of uncertainty and not the living room of uncertainty, this is just dipping in because, as we said, it's still not even 7 o'clock, and we do have housemates and just want to show the minimum of respect. Yeah, so we're in here for now, but it's nice. It's very comfy. And the perfect place for a debrief, Johnny. So what are your opening thoughts then after one race on these new regulations?
I think we have to separate it into my qualifying thoughts and my race thoughts. Qualifying has been ruined is a very strong word, but it's nowhere near what it should be. The whole kind of saving grace of qualifying, which generally speaking, they're just setting the grid, no points are given out, which by the way, I would change. I think there should be points awarded for the top 3 in qualifying. I would give 3 points to first, 2 to second and 1, or maybe 5, 3, 1 or something like that. But I do think there should be points for qualifying because it is who's the fastest driver. Surely that should mean something. That's I digress. I think watching a car in qualifying should be on the ragged edge, dancing at the limit, the drivers unleashed, working hard, and to see them lifting off through. And I would recommend watching, Charlie, some just onboards of qualifying, and you'll see what I mean. Certainly through the chicane, they're lifting off so soon before that corner. That's not right, and it really worries me for tracks like, yes, Australia is a power circuit, but when we get to Monza, which is full throttle for like 70% of the lap or something, maybe even more than that, it's just Monza is straight, followed by fast corner, followed by straight, followed by fast corner. Are they going to be lifting off halfway down the straight into every fast corner? I don't know, I dread to think. So there are some really worrying signs from qualifying. As for the race, look, if they're going to be going side by side past each other twice every lap when battling for the lead, then I'm here for it. I still think that it does give a sense of, and this might be just because it's the first race, and as we settle into it, we'll understand what is deliberate and what is meaningful, but you still kind of don't know. A driver could be 2 seconds a lap off the pace, 1 lap. I was watching the gaps, and I think a lot of what you watch when the action kind of sterilizes is you watch the gaps. And I was watching Verstappen's gaps, shock, and there was 1 lap where he was 2 seconds slower than Hamilton in front, and the next lap he was only about a tenth slower. So clearly he's had 1 lap where he's backed off to deploy to save and then deployed. So it's a bit weird. You can see a driver losing a lot of time, but that's all part of getting the maximum race time. Weird. But all in all, I'm pretty satisfied with how the regs were during the race. It's just qualifying as a spectacle, I think, is a bit ruined, and that's not right.
No, yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm just going to check the camera because I've got horrible
feeling that it's not on.
Yeah, it is on.
That's okay. Nothing to worry about.
Yeah, nothing to worry about. Yeah, I think it's interesting because as a casual fan, I probably have a slightly different relationship with.
I was meant to ask you that, Charlie. It was in the doc for me to ask you.
It's written down. Do you want to ask me?
Charlie, as a casual fan, what do you think of these regulations? Did you find them difficult to follow?
Well, I think if we start with qualifying, I think I completely understand your concerns with that. But straight off the bat, a casual fan probably isn't going to be watching qualifying. I think that's probably more one for the heads than anything else. And I think if the trade-off is you are going to get the top 2 and 3 duking it out with lots of changes in position, I think that will help to attract more casual fans. I think the other thing that probably didn't affect me as much as it affected you, I think you said a couple of times, like, you can really just, you can hear how early they're lifting off into the corners, like, and I really couldn't, because I don't know what I'm listening for. Like, I absolutely believe you that that's the case, but I think you need to be somewhat attuned to the sounds that these cars make to know that that's happening. So that didn't really bother me. I think the only other thing for me that that you've already touched on is they need to, the TV graphics need to tell us what the situation is with the batteries. Otherwise, you just don't understand why anything's happening. It's like, is driver A just quicker than driver B, or is driver B storing up? Was that a really good overtake, or was it he was just getting let through? And as you say, Sky managed to find it all of a sudden. But I'm a little bit hesitant as to how they're getting that information, how reliable it is. I'd be really surprised. I think when the race started and there wasn't anything of that sort, my initial reaction was, well, the teams obviously wouldn't want that information being readily available, because obviously the other teams can just watch the feed and be like, right, go now, he's on 10%. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I do think F1 themselves and the TV providers need to be giving us as much information as possible without overloading us about the battery situation. Otherwise, it's just going to be a little bit hard to understand what's actually happening. Yeah,
I think that I think it was Norris versus Verstappen where they had it up just for one battle, which was a bit strange, which led me to think maybe they just had, because those two obviously were the top 2 in the championship last year. I wonder if they went, well, we only get the data for a select amount of drivers, let's definitely have Norris and Verstappen in there. But really, I think that needs to be there for all drivers, and whenever there's a battle, 2 drivers close on track, we need to see that graphic. Another thing I would suggest is on the timing tower, just have a battery graphic on there. If they do have the data for every driver, I'd want to see a battery graphic where we can see where each driver is. And they have this with Formula E, I think, is with their battery, in the same way that they have the tyre compound they're on. I think battery is going to be so important this season, and it really does tell the story of the race, as you say, how much of a genuine kind of bona fide overtake was that. We don't know unless we have the electrical battery deployment image, so that is very important. But you found it, other than that, it wasn't like it was followable.
Yeah, and it wasn't a complete shock to the system. Again, if you know more what you're looking out for, I'm sure this looked and sounded unlike any other F1 race we've seen. But from my perspective, I think considering how much I'd heard and the little, slightly maybe misleading clips I'd seen, like the start test that they did in testing, I think overall the cars looked and sounded a lot more similar to an F1 car in my mind than I potentially expected them to be. And I don't think I, for one, got major whiplash or anything like that. I think, as you said in the last episode, tradition is clearly such a big part of the sport and how it's constructed, but with new eyes on it every year and more coming from Drive to Survive and just the fact that it's becoming such a social media sensation, the sport, I do think anything to make the actual race interesting is probably going to be good overall.
And on that point, I think we'll get used to it as well. I mean, I remember when 2014 came around and the engines were quieter, the cars were smaller and slower, and Mercedes were 10 seconds ahead after the first lap. There was real talk that this is awful and we need to make changes and it's not working. And actually, in the end, all we really got from that was Hamilton versus Rosberg, but that was a battle for the ages. And at least it doesn't seem like Mercedes are that far clear. And also, Australia's always been a bit of an anomaly. I think this being the first race of the season always threw up a few things that, looking back later in the season, you go, oh, that happened in Australia. That's not been the narrative of the season. So I do think that we need to give it 5 or 6 races to take shape. And it's also worth noting that Mercedes had that compression ratio trick, and I think July has been confirmed as the month where that will be, the way they judge that will change from ambient temperature to working temperature, which could change the pecking order a bit, although I imagine Mercedes will find a way through. So I think we need to stick with it for a bit, and I do think that as the races go by and teams work it out, we will start to get a bit more of a clearer picture of where everything is, and a consistent, teams are so smart. They have so much data. They'll work out the best way to go about utilising these regulations, and I think it'll be all right in the race. I'm not sure about qualifying.
Well, we'll keep a keen eye on that. Moving on to driver of the day. The votes gave it to Max Verstappen in the end. Who would you give it to?
Yeah, we were saying, Charlie, weren't we, that Max Verstappen starting from the back of the grid has almost become this mythical thing where he always finds a way to finish on the podium or win, certainly in the wet, particularly in Brazil, because whenever he starts at the back there, he's going to win the race. So we kind of get, when he goes from last to 6th, I think for most drivers, you go, wow, what a drive. But for him, you kind of go, that's what you expect.
Yeah, it didn't feel like... I think it especially wasn't really helped by the fact that there wasn't really a point in the race where he was the main focus for the TV cameras. I think he did a lot of his work early on when Leclerc and Russell were battling, and he just sort of quietly did his thing. It was a very professional drive, but probably not going to rank in the top 30 Max Verstappen drives.
Yeah, so I think if we're being objective, and this is going to sound strange as a Max fan who'll do anything to promote my man, I think objectively he probably was the driver of the day in terms of performance, but I'm not going to pick him because I think that we're used to that for Max, and a 10 out of 10 drive from Max Verstappen, I feel like, is the ceiling, the bar is higher for him than any other driver on the grid because he's done it so often from lower down, more than anyone else I can remember in history. So I don't think he's cleared that bar from what I've seen him do. So I'm going to give it to Arvid Lindblad, that we've discussed already. His first race in Formula One, qualified in the top 10, finished 8th in a car that was by no means guaranteed to be fighting in the top 10. Didn't put a foot wrong, looked feisty, with some on the edge, but I think just about okay moves to defend and attack. And he actually got his elbows out with Max Verstappen, which is something we haven't seen from the junior team. I think most drivers coming into the sport, and because Verstappen is so revered among the rookies and he gets on so well with them and he always takes time out with them, I think particularly the Racing Bulls drivers see him in the mirrors, and even if there is no call from the team to do so, there's a little bit of, if I take him out, then my career's in jeopardy. I don't want to do that. He was like, no, I'm not going to show him any preferential treatment. I will fight him. And he did defend for a lap or two, which was nice to see. I wanted him to get out of the way, obviously, but from his point of view, fair play. A young Max Verstappen wasn't getting out of the way for the Red Bulls. He was racing them and often beating them. So fair play to Arvid Lindblad. I think driver of the day for me.
Yeah, we spoke in the preview about George Russell not being sort of blinded by the light which emanates from Max Verstappen, and that being crucial to the title race. But it's nice. It would be nice to see some of the rookies and the people in the middle of the pack take the same approach and stand up to him, because I know Verstappen himself would enjoy that, and it would be good for the sport overall. I really like talking to you about Verstappen on air. I think I'm just only ever going to speak Verstappen with you on air now, because this isn't what he's like if the cameras aren't rolling.
Trying to be as...
It's much more gushing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm happy with this arrangement. So Lindblad was a nice surprise, but who else was a good surprise, team or driver?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm surprised by Ollie Behrman, because I did expect Haas to be better than the rest, and I'm happy with that. But I think Audi, Bortoletto specifically, because obviously Hulkenberg didn't get to get going because of his engine issue on the grid. But I don't think anybody after testing expected Audi to get a point, and I think it's a really good effort from where they were in testing to finish in the top 10. Not only in the top 10, but 9th. Pierre Gasly was my pick for best of the rest. Alongside Ollie Behrman. I would have had maybe Behrman 7th and Gasly 8th if I was to predict the top 10. So fair play to Bortoletto. He's my best good surprise.
Yeah, if I could throw another one in there, I would actually say Aston Martin.
Yeah.
They completed a hell of a lot more laps than we were anticipating, and it was really quite heartwarming to see them send both Stroll and Alonso back out there after initially sort of not quite retiring, but going into the pits for an extended period. It's clear that they've obviously, they've completely misused or missed the opportunity to utilize testing. And for the time being, they're just going to have to use the races as testing. But I think it was, it's heartening to see Lance Stroll in particular out there for so long after saying he didn't really want to do more than 15 or 25 laps.
And Alonso got a blinding start. He was 10th after the first lap, which was, very short-lived. I think by, 3 laps later, he was down in 17th again. But just shows the cat-like reactions and, the old dog, there's still life in there. Just give him a good car, please. I think that's one of my big wants in Formula One throughout, my time being a fan was, I don't know if you knew this about Nico Hulkenberg, but he held the record for most race starts without a podium. I think it was about 250 odd, and he'd been in position to get podiums so many times, and through driver error or bad luck, he just kept missing out. And then there was an acceptance, because he's retired twice before coming back, that he would hold that record. And then last year in Silverstone, he went from 17th to 3rd and got his first podium in a kick Sauber, in one of the great moments in feel good moments in Formula One history, where he finally shed that record and no longer holds it. My next one is now Fernando Alonso breaking the record of having a longer career without a win than with a win. As in, he's now gone without a win for more than half of his career. And for such a legendary driver whose stats criminally underrate him, he's 5 points correctly smattered throughout his career would leave him 5 times a champion of the world rather than 2. I just would love to see him win one more before he retires.
Yeah, that is correct. A race, I imagine you mean, not championship. But
that's never going to happen.
Yeah, it is insane. 5 points for 3 more championships. And Adrian Newey was being similarly gushing of him in one of his a very long, honest interview he did, where it was obviously primarily negative about the car, but it was really nice to hear him talk about Alonso and him saying he deserves so many more than 2 titles, and considering that Newey himself played a pretty large hand in depriving Alonso of further titles. But he also said that Alonso is telling him that he feels fine. He doesn't feel like his reaction times he's actually, and Newey also said last season he had the fastest reaction times, still the fastest starts of anyone. So Newey seemed to suggest that Alonso didn't feel like he needed to step away for physical reasons on his part. But obviously if this were to continue, he's in the last year of his contract. I don't think he would see it out any longer. But I think we're both, the top step, are both absolutely rooting for Alonso to be able to get something out of this Aston Martin, and we wish him best of luck for the rest of the season. So moving on to bad surprise, team or driver, have you got someone in mind?
Yeah, I think 2 candidates for this one. One is slightly more surprising than the other, but I'll just say what I need to say and maybe it'll make sense. If we were to say that testing happened in a vacuum, and we take the end of last season, the expectations going into this season, and then the results from the first race, by far the biggest bad surprise, other than Aston Martin, but we've spoken about their woes, Williams, definitely Williams, because they've been saying throughout the last regulation set that they were consolidating, they were building resources and aiming to go at it in 2026. And I really respect their team principal, James Vowles, a very good talker, very honest man, saying throughout that we care about 2026. That's the year we want to go for it. And to finish 12th and 15th, and I think throughout the race, Carlos Sainz was complaining about some engine issues and energy deployment issues. And Alex Albon, as far as we know, had a pretty clear run and only got to 12th place. That's really disappointing for a team that, let's not forget, Sainz got 2 podiums last year in that Williams. So that's disappointing. And I think just based on where we thought they'd be, yes, Pierre Gasly got the last point for Alpine. I think we expected a bit more, or certainly I did, from the Alpine. They're running the Mercedes engine, so in theory should have a great opportunity to be right up there. And it just didn't really come together for them. But I think I'm going to give it to Williams, just because 12th and 15th is not where they should be.
No, absolutely worrying signs for them after, as you say, pouring so much into this season. Just one more thing to cover, really, and that's looking to the future. And in 2 weeks' time, we have China,
the Chinese Grand Prix. Yes, that's going to be very interesting. As Australia was interesting, because that's got a lot of short straights. China has one. I'll show you the track map, Charlie. You might see what I mean. China has one very long straight, which for a long time was the longest in Formula One. I don't think it is anymore. But yeah, it's that one there.
Yeah.
So it has a very, very long straight, which... and also, to be fair, the start finish straight isn't particularly... Yeah, it's not short. So 2 long straights, and... Yeah, harvesting is going to be very interesting there, because a lot of those corners in the infield as well, they're not slow corners. There's only one really hard braking point, which is turn 13, and then the rest are pretty flowing. It's quite a flowing circuit, quite a nice circuit to drive by lots of things. I think there's a possibility that even 3/4 of the way down that long straight, that back straight, we're going to see some heavy super clipping, which could be quite frustrating to see. So we'll see how the cars go about tackling that long straight. But yeah, China's always been a bit of an underrated track. I think there has been some decent races there, and often has held records. This record changes quite a lot, but I think for quite a while was the track that had the most overtakes of all time, was at a race at this track. So could be interesting to see how that plays out, and that's in 2 weeks' time.
I could understand why you would be, frustrated about the notion of drivers not going flat out or not even being able to on, the biggest straight there is. But I guess the counter argument to that would be, as you say, in qualifying, you'd obviously love to see them just driving as fast as they can. But in a race, if everyone's just like bolting down the straight, there's not particularly very much racing going on there. Yeah. Obviously, in previous years, we would have had lots of DRS overtakes on that straight, I'm sure, but that's not the most thrilling either. It's a formality, really. If you're on a straight within DRS range of someone, you're going to go past them. So potentially, it's going to be weird for us to adjust to again, but might we actually see a little bit more compelling racing down that big straight if the battery is involved? Very
possibly. I mean, something that I think it was Martin Brundle was saying on Co-Coms today, on the Sky broadcast, is that what we want from any overtaking aids, be it DRS, be it active aero, be it boost mode, overtake mode, we don't want to see them get the pass started and done while they're going flat out. We want to see them get alongside, get them in the area so that the drivers can do something on the brakes, and then it's still driver skill getting the move done. And actually, I think a lot of that we saw today in the main. There were a few drive-bys, but mostly there was a little bit of braking needed to be done. Certainly, obviously, I was watching Verstappen's progress in the little mini box, and most of his moves early on were jinx to the inside to throw it down the inside and pass cars, which we want to see. We don't want to see drive-bys. So I'm hoping that that's what this will see, that we'll see, because that long straight ends in a really tight hairpin. It'll bring cars maybe just behind alongside so they can move out of the slipstream and make a dive. That's what we want to see. So possibly, we'll just have to see what happens.
Well, I'm sure it will be fascinating, even if it does look like we've got a very clear front-running team and driver. There's plenty more to be discussed, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time to do just that. And in the meantime, we've got one more cricket episode for you, which we will be recording later today after watching the World Cup final. It's a big day for us today. We're about to go back to bed for 4 or 5 hours and then back up and crack on. But very excited for that. I'm very excited for just more content with you, Johnny. Cricket and F1. So thank you for being here in your own living room, and I will see you here in about 4 hours. Yes. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you very soon.
See you later.